August 1944. A German Tiger tank destroys 27 Shermans, certain of victory, until fresh waves of American tanks appear on the horizon. This isn't just a battle of guns and armor. It's the cold arithmetic of industry. From Roosevelt's phone call to Detroit's assembly lines to the moment German soldiers admitted, "We are fighting factories, not men." August 8th, 1944, near Sinto, Normandy. The leather of his commander's gloves creaked as SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann adjusted his binoculars inside Tiger 007. Outside, the French hedgerows burned. 27 Sherman tanks lay smoldering across the fields, their blackened hulks testament to the brutal efficiency of the Tiger's 88mm gun. For 3 relentless hours, Wittmann and 3 other Tigers had carved through wave after wave of American and British armor. Every lesson drilled into him at the Panzertruppenschule told him they were winning. His company had destroyed far more than they had lost. By the mathematics of tactics, kill ratios, accuracy, maneuver, they were victorious. And yet, as he scanned the horizon through the Zeiss lenses, Wittmann's hands began to tremble. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Through the shimmering August heat, he saw them. Dozens of fresh Shermans, advancing from 3 directions, their formations tight, their turrets steady. Behind them, more dust clouds, columns of armor stretching beyond sight. The battlefield was shifting before his eyes. This was no longer a duel of tank against tank, no contest of gunnery skill. It was arithmetic, cold, merciless arithmetic. His own Tiger still had ammunition, 12 rounds of armor-piercing shells among the entire company. Fuel was low. No reinforcements were coming. Germany's finest machine, perhaps the most feared tank in the world, was about to be swallowed whole. Wittmann's radio crackled. The last words he would ever transmit, recorded at 12:47 that afternoon, carried the weight of every German tanker who faced American production power. Ammunition exhausted, enemy unlimited. Minutes later, Tiger 007 erupted in flames, struck by Allied fire. Whether British, Canadian, or American, historians still debate. What mattered wasn't the shell that killed him, but the reality his death symbolized. Wittmann, Germany's most famous tank ace, had discovered the truth that would haunt every German soldier from Normandy to the Ruhr: that this war would not be decided by brilliance or bravery or even the best tank ever built. It would be decided in factories thousands of miles away, where machines rolled off assembly lines by the thousands. And in that arithmetic, Germany was already doomed. May 26th, 1941. Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat in Bavaria. The room was filled with cigarette smoke and the heavy odor of leather boots. On the long wooden table stood 2 hulking prototypes, tanks unlike anything the world had ever seen. Representatives from Porsche and Henschel had brought their competing designs for what would become the Tiger. Adolf Hitler, pacing with the nervous energy of a man obsessed, stopped before the massive 88mm gun. His generals looked on, some skeptical, others awed. Hitler placed a hand on the cold steel barrel and spoke words that would seal Germany's fate. "This machine will be worth a battalion of ordinary tanks. One Tiger will destroy a dozen enemy vehicles." The order that followed was simple, absolute, and catastrophic. Quality over quantity. Germany would build the most powerful tank ever designed, each one a masterpiece of engineering, a fortress of steel. But every masterpiece comes with a cost. When the first production Tiger rolled off Henschel's Castle factory line on August 4th, 1942, it had consumed 300,000 man-hours. 26,000 individual parts had been hand-fitted by skilled craftsmen. Welders spent days on the armor plating. The intricate suspension system, an overlapping set of interleaved wheels, required precision so fine that only experienced machinists could assemble it. One German officer watching the trials at Kummersdorf wrote, almost proudly, "This is the pinnacle of German engineering. No enemy can stand against it. If we can build 100 of these every month, the war is won." But they never did. They never even came close. At its peak in April 1944, Germany managed to build 104 Tigers in a single month. That was their record. In comparison, by that same year, American factories were rolling out 2,000 Shermans every month. The Tiger was powerful. Its 88-millimeter gun could pierce a Sherman from over a mile away. Its armor could shrug off hits that would have turned lesser tanks into burning wrecks. But this power came at a terrible price. The Tiger was heavy, complicated, and fragile in its own way. It broke down often. It needed special railway cars for transport. And every Tiger that rolled out of Kassel carried not just steel, but the weight of time Germany didn't have. To the Germans, it was art. To the Americans, it was over-engineering. Propaganda. Minister Joseph Goebbels mocked American armor as Detroit tin cans on tracks. But while Tigers trickled out of German factories, America was preparing something different, something designed not to dazzle, but to overwhelm. And as Whitman and other German tank aces would learn on the battlefields of 1944, the arithmetic of war doesn't favor art. It favors output. May 28, 1940. Washington, D.C. The phone rang in William Knudsen's Detroit office. A Danish immigrant who had risen to become president of General Motors, Knudsen was one of the most respected industrialists in America. On the line was President Franklin D. Roosevelt. "Bill," the president said, "I want you to come to Washington. We need to build 50,000 planes and 50,000 tanks." Knudsen's reply would define the entire American war effort. "Mr. President, we can't build the best planes and tanks, but we can build the most planes and tanks, and we can build them so that any kid from Iowa can fix them with a wrench and a screwdriver." That single sentence captured the essence of America's approach to war production. Germany was chasing perfection, handcrafted machines, intricate engineering, the Tiger tank. America would chase quantity and reliability. 2 months later, in August 1940, at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, Army ordnance officers met with contractors. They laid down requirements that horrified traditional engineers but delighted Detroit manufacturers. The Sherman tank would not be elegant. It would not be revolutionary. But it would be simple enough for inexperienced workers to build. Interchangeable, with parts that fit across every model. Flexible, with engines that could run on multiple fuel types. Repairable, even in muddy fields with only basic tools. Upgradable, with a turret ring wide enough for future guns. General Gladian Barnes, head of Army Ordnance, put it bluntly: "I don't want a perfect tank. I want a good enough tank that we can build 1,000 of them for every 100 the Germans build. Make it reliable, make it fixable, and make it by the tens of thousands." It was a philosophy that stunned German observers. While Nazi propaganda boasted about craftsmanship, America was preparing an assembly line army. And here was the secret: America didn't just have engineers, it had Detroit. The same city that had churned out millions of automobiles was about to retool itself for tanks. Auto workers who once built Chevrolets and Buicks would soon be building Shermans. Housewives and teenagers would be trained in riveting and welding. Entire factories would be converted overnight into what Roosevelt proudly called the arsenal of democracy. In Berlin, German generals dismissed Roosevelt's numbers as fantasy. Even Hermann Göring scoffed. "Let them try. They know nothing of war production. They will learn you cannot build weapons as if they were automobiles." But Göring was wrong. That was exactly what America was about to do. And while the first Shermans were still months away, the blueprint for victory had already been drawn. Not on a battlefield, but on a production line. Autumn 1942. Kassel, Germany, and Detroit, Michigan. The difference could not have been more stark. At Henschel's tank factory in Kassel, nearly 9,000 skilled craftsmen labored over each Tiger tank like artisans in a medieval guild. Every component was measured with micrometers. Welds were inspected and re-inspected. Even the final drive assembly took 3 full days to complete. Workers signed their names on finished parts as if they were works of art. A German machinist later recalled, "We spent 3 days just on the gears. Every weld was checked 3 times. We painted numbers by hand. It was not mass production, it was art." But art takes time. Time Germany did not have. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a new kind of factory had just opened outside Detroit. On September 15, 1941, Chrysler unveiled the Detroit Tank Arsenal, a sprawling plant covering 1.25 million square feet, larger than all German tank factories combined. Inside, the scene was radically different. Not master craftsmen, but thousands of ordinary Americans, auto workers, farm boys, housewives, even teenagers fresh from high school. Men and women who had never seen a tank before were given just 2 days of training before stepping onto the line. Roswell Monroe, later immortalized as Rosie the Riveter, described it simply: "I'd never seen a tank before I started building them. They gave us 2 days of training. I welded one seam, then the tank moved down the line. Someone else welded the next. We finished a tank in 4 hours." 4 hours. That was the rhythm of American war production. While German workers poured 300,000 hours into a single Tiger, Detroit workers finished a Sherman every 2 days, and soon every few hours. The difference was more than numbers. It was philosophy. In Germany, tanks were handcrafted monuments to engineering pride. In America, tanks were broken down into modular parts, built on parallel lines, then snapped together like an enormous puzzle. By December 1942, Chrysler's plant was producing 896 Shermans per month, 26 times more than Germany's Tiger output. And Detroit wasn't alone. 11 other factories across the US were building Shermans. The contrast looked like two different centuries colliding. Germany stuck in the 19th century of craft guilds, America roaring into the 20th with conveyor belts and welding torches. For German officers, the first captured Sherman seemed crude: welded plates, simple mechanics, nothing elegant about it. But to American commanders, its very simplicity was genius. Any soldier with a wrench could repair it. Any factory could build it. It was the difference between a handcrafted watch and a pocketful of reliable stopwatches. One might be beautiful, but the other wins a war. And as the months passed, this industrial divide would ripple through everything: how crews trained, how fast tanks were replaced, and how soldiers on both sides began to sense that the war's outcome was no longer in doubt. Fort Knox, Kentucky, spring 1943. The sound of engines thundered across the rolling fields as columns of Sherman tanks churned up the dirt. For young American recruits, this was the beginning of tank school. And the classroom wasn't a blackboard. It was the very machine they would take into combat. At Fort Knox, hundreds of Shermans were set aside just for training. Crews spent 12 weeks driving, firing, and repairing them until the tanks felt like extensions of their own bodies. They fired thousands of practice rounds. They drove hundreds of miles over rough ground. They broke engines, stripped gearboxes, tore off tracks, then learned to put them back together again. Private First Class Clarence Smoyer, who would later serve in Europe, remembered it well. "We beat the hell out of those training tanks, drove them till they broke, fixed them, then drove them again. By the time we shipped out, I knew that Sherman better than my family's farm tractor. Every sound it made, I knew what it meant." That was the American advantage: abundance. The US Army could afford to let recruits destroy tanks in training because there were always more coming off the production lines. Now compare that to Germany. At Putlos, the Panzer Training School on the Baltic Sea, Tiger crews had a grand total of 4 operational tanks to share among hundreds of trainees. Some recruits got just 3 days inside a real Tiger before being shipped to the front. Others never even touched one. Instead, they studied diagrams or sat in wooden mock-ups of turrets. They memorized manuals but had no feel for the 57-ton machine they were expected to fight and survive in. Gefreiter Kurt Kleine, assigned to Schwer Panzerabteilung 503, later recalled, "When we received our company Tigers in Russia, half the men had never even started a Maybach engine. Some didn't know how to change gears under load. We learned in combat, and we paid for every mistake with lives." The imbalance was staggering. An American crew might enter combat with 12 full weeks of live fire tank experience. A German Tiger crew often entered combat with only diagrams in their heads. The Tiger was a masterpiece, yes, but a masterpiece wasted if the men inside didn't know how to use it. The Sherman, by contrast, was not just plentiful, it was practical. Crews trained until they could swap an engine blindfolded, replace a track in mud, or patch a radiator leak with whatever they had on hand. By the time D-Day arrived, American tankers were not just soldiers. They were mechanics, drivers, gunners, and engineers rolled into one. They knew their machines inside and out because America had given them enough machines to learn on. In Germany, every Tiger was too precious to risk in training. In America, training itself became a weapon. January 1943, Berlin, Germany. General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of the Panzer Troops, sat at his desk reviewing an intelligence report smuggled out of Washington. The numbers staring back at him seemed impossible. American factories, it said, were producing nearly 3,500 Sherman tanks every month. Germany, by comparison, had managed just 34 Tigers in that same period, 100 to 1. Guderian closed the folder and wrote a single line in his diary. If these numbers are even half true, we have already lost the war. For a man who had helped invent modern tank warfare, the Blitzkrieg itself, those words carried the weight of prophecy. The math told the truth better than any propaganda could. Sherman tank. About 15,000 parts, requiring 50 common tools for field repair. Tiger tank, 26,000 parts, demanding 230 specialized tools, most of them unavailable at the front. An American Sherman could be stripped and repaired in the mud of Italy by a 20-year-old mechanic with a wrench set. A German Tiger often sat immobile for weeks, waiting on spare parts that never arrived. But numbers didn't just mean replacements. They meant training, replacements, and reserves. In Kentucky, American crews burned through tanks in practice without fear. In Normandy, when a Sherman was knocked out, another rolled off a landing ship within 48 hours. Behind the beaches sat a reserve of 2,300 Shermans, waiting to be issued like spare rifles. Germany had no such luxury. Every Tiger lost was a national event, a blow to morale, and a logistical nightmare. Replacement could take weeks, if it came at all. On paper, a Tiger outclassed a Sherman. Better gun, better armor, longer range. One Tiger might destroy 6, even 10 Shermans in a single battle. But war isn't fought on paper. War is fought in fields and villages, over weeks and months, under skies filled with Allied bombers. And in that war, the Tiger was doomed by arithmetic. Consider this. At peak, Germany produced 104 Tigers in 1 month. That same month, America produced 2,000 Shermans. That's 20 Tigers per week versus 500 Shermans every 7 days. No matter how brilliant the tactics, no matter how skilled the crew, no Tiger could survive those odds forever. The battlefield of Normandy, where Michael Whitman and others discovered wave after wave of Shermans, was not a tactical duel. It was a production war, fought in factories, not fields. And it was a war Germany was losing by the hour. June 6, 1944. Normandy, France. The beaches shook with fire and steel. American, British, and Canadian forces poured ashore under the cover of naval guns and bombers. And among the waves of men came something the Germans had never faced on such a scale. Tanks. Thousands of them. By the end of that single day, the Allies had landed with 4,000 tanks, most of them Shermans. Waiting just across the English Channel were another 8,000 more, ready to cross when needed. Germany, in contrast, could muster only 102 operational Tigers in all of Normandy. Across every front, Russia, Italy, France, barely 430 Tigers remained combat ready. The imbalance was overwhelming. On June 7th, one day after the landings, an SS officer from Schwerer SS Panzerabteilung 101 recorded his shock in his diary. We destroyed 8 Shermans in the morning. By afternoon, 16 more had taken their place. We destroyed 6 of those. By evening, fresh companies kept arriving. They came like ants. You could step on dozens, hundreds, thousands more were behind them. This was no longer the war of 1940, when German panzers had crushed France in 6 weeks. Now, every Tiger destroyed seemed meaningless, because 2, 3, or 4 new Shermans appeared to replace it. The replacement system was the key. Colonel Joseph Gilman, overseeing Allied armored reserves, had stockpiled 2,300 Shermans in depots across Britain. Any tank lost in Normandy could be replaced within 48 hours. German commanders could only watch in disbelief. When a Tiger was destroyed, the replacement journey took weeks. The tank had to be built in Kassel, loaded onto a special railway car, hauled across Germany, then France, under constant threat from Allied bombers. Finally, it might arrive at the front, if it hadn't been destroyed en route. In June 1904 alone, 45 Tigers were dispatched to Normandy. Only 17 arrived intact. For the men inside the Tigers, the realization was devastating. They could win every duel, kill tank after tank, and still be overwhelmed. One Tiger crewman wrote after surviving a battle near Caen, "We killed 6 Shermans before noon. By evening, we were surrounded by 12 more. It was as if the Americans had endless steel." And they did. The beaches of Normandy were not just the site of the largest amphibious invasion in history. They were the stage where American industry revealed its true power. The Germans had prepared for courage, for tactics, for ingenuity. What they had not prepared for was an enemy who could throw thousands of tanks into battle and never run out. D-Day was not just a military landing. It was the physical manifestation of Roosevelt's call from 4 years earlier. An America that could build so much, so fast, that no enemy could ever keep up. And for the Tiger crews watching wave after wave of Shermans roll ashore, the realization was inescapable. The avalanche had begun, and it would not stop. Normandy, summer, 1944. On the morning of June 10th, a Sherman tank from the U.S. 2nd Armored Division was knocked out near a hedgerow outside Caen. Its turret was split open, smoke rising into the sky. By noon, the crew had been reassigned to a reserve vehicle. By the next morning, a brand new Sherman, straight off a ship from England, was parked where the wreck had stood. The turnaround? Less than 48 hours. This wasn't luck, it was design. Colonel Joseph Gilman, head of the U.S. Army's Armored Replacement System, had created something the Germans could barely comprehend, a rolling reserve of thousands of tanks, ready to move at a moment's notice. In Britain alone, depots held 2,300 Shermans, lined up in neat rows, waiting to be shipped across the Channel as soon as losses were reported. Damaged tanks weren't a crisis. They were an inconvenience. Mobile repair crews traveled with every armored division. If a Sherman could be fixed in the field, it was patched up and back in action within hours. If it couldn't, the crew abandoned it and simply drew another from the reserve. The system worked with ruthless efficiency. A Sherman destroyed on Tuesday could be replaced by Thursday. Crews trained to fight, not to worry about whether they would have a machine to drive tomorrow. Commanders could plan offensives knowing reinforcements would arrive before they even asked. Now, contrast that with Germany. Every Tiger lost was a logistical nightmare. A replacement tank first had to be built, often taking weeks in Castle's Henschel factory. Then came the journey, loaded onto a specialized railway car, hauled across Germany and France, constantly delayed by Allied air raids, offloaded at a station, reassembled, and finally driven toward the front. What took the Americans 48 hours often took the Germans 5 weeks or more. In June 1944, German High Command dispatched 45 Tigers to Normandy. Only 17 made it to the battlefield. The rest were destroyed by bombing, mechanical breakdowns, or logistical bottlenecks before they ever saw combat. For Tiger crews in the field, the difference was devastating. They fought, knowing that every loss was permanent, every breakdown a disaster. For Sherman crews, it was the opposite. They fought with the confidence of men who knew the system would never leave them stranded. One German tanker summed it up after the war. "We killed Shermans in the morning, and by the afternoon more had arrived. When we lost a Tiger, it was gone forever. The Americans seemed to have an endless supply." The truth was, they did. This replacement system was more than logistics. It was a weapon. It gave the Allies momentum, the kind of momentum no enemy could stop. And as the war ground forward, that 48-hour promise, destroyed today, replaced tomorrow, was the death sentence of Germany's armored force. June 13th, 1944, Villers-Bocage, Normandy. The morning began like a tale out of German propaganda. SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann, already a legend on the Eastern Front, maneuvered his Tiger 007 into position on a ridge overlooking the British 7th Armored Division, the famed Desert Rats. Below him, a long column of Sherman Fireflies, Cromwells, and half-tracks snaked through the town. With one thunderous shot, the ambush began. Within minutes, Wittmann had destroyed 14 British tanks and armored vehicles. Smoke filled the streets. Crews scrambled for cover. Radio operators shouted in panic. For a moment, it seemed one man and one Tiger had stopped an entire British advance. News of the ambush raced back to Berlin. Goebbels' propaganda ministry declared Wittmann a national hero. Posters, radio broadcasts, and headlines hailed him as the Tiger Ace of Villers-Bocage. In a war drowning in bad news, this single victory was trumpeted as proof that German engineering and courage could still prevail. But behind the smoke and shattered Shermans, the truth was already catching up. 3 days later, fresh Allied armor arrived. Dozens of tanks, then hundreds. British reserves surged forward, while American Shermans pushed from another direction. Whitman's victory, so dazzling in the moment, was swallowed in the avalanche. And then the inevitable came. On August 8th, 1944, near Sintho, Whitman's Tiger 007 advanced with a handful of others into a storm of Allied tanks and fighter bombers. This time, there would be no miracle ambush. His Tiger was struck. Historians still debate whether by a British Firefly, Canadian anti-tank fire, or even an Allied aircraft. What is certain is that the tank exploded, killing Whitman and his entire crew instantly. The wreck burned for hours, a blackened husk in the French fields. His death was a symbol, as powerful as his ambush had been, because by August, the numbers had made him irrelevant. Germany had lost hundreds of tanks. America had already replaced every Sherman destroyed on D-Day, and then some. For every Tiger that rumbled into Normandy, 10 Shermans were waiting. Michael Whitman was not defeated by a shell. He was defeated by arithmetic. One man, one Tiger, even one brilliant ambush could not stop the flow of Allied steel. Heroism had turned into a statistic, as one German tanker later admitted after the war. Whitman fought like a lion, but even lions die when the forest burns down around them. Villers-Bocage was his triumph. Sintho was his grave. And both together told the story of Germany's war, brilliance, courage, and skill, crushed under the weight of America's factories. Normandy, July 1944. The battlefields of France were littered with burned-out Tigers and Shermans alike. But for the German soldiers still fighting, the most shocking part wasn't the destruction. It was what came after. In the diary of Obergefreiter Hans Keller, a Panzer Grenadier from the 2nd SS Panzer Division, the disbelief is clear. This morning, we destroyed 6 Shermans. By afternoon, there were 10 more. It is as if they have no end. We kill, and yet their numbers grow. The frustration dripped from every line. German troops were fighting with courage and skill. They were achieving the kill ratios their commanders demanded. But for the first time, they were realizing that tactics no longer mattered when the enemy had infinite replacements. Private letters carried the same tone. Gefreiter Wilhelm Krause, writing home to his wife from Normandy, described the exhaustion of repairing a Tiger bogged down in mud. We spent 12 hours pulling the wheels free, knee-deep in filth. The Americans change a track in 30 minutes. They always have spare parts. We never do. Everyday details became symbols of defeat. German crews scavenged for fuel, drained abandoned vehicles, even siphoned from civilian cars to keep their Tigers moving. Meanwhile, American tankers filled up from 55-gallon drums, stacked in pyramids along French roadsides, as if gasoline grew from the soil. The shock wasn't just about tanks. It was about everything the Americans brought with them. Captured German soldiers later recalled their amazement at the food. Sherman crews ate tinned meat, chocolate bars, even fresh bread baked. In mobile field ovens, cigarettes and Coca-Cola seemed endless. A wounded German officer treated in an American field hospital admitted, "They gave me real coffee. I had not tasted it in 4 years." For men raised on propaganda that painted America as weak and decadent, the reality was crushing. Here was an enemy whose abundance felt supernatural, almost impossible. In one captured letter from a German infantryman to his brother on the Eastern Front, the despair was unmistakable. "We are not fighting soldiers anymore. We are fighting factories." That sentence captured the truth every Tiger crew, every German soldier, was slowly forced to admit. Their courage was real. Their weapons were formidable. But against the industrial might of the United States, even bravery became irrelevant. And in Normandy, as fresh Shermans rolled forward day after day, the German army began to realize that the war was not just being lost. It had already been decided, and the war in Europe could be told through maps, battles, and generals. But sometimes the truth is simpler. Just numbers on a page. By the end of World War II, Germany had produced 1,347 Tiger tanks in total. That's it. Every Tiger ever built, from the first prototype in 1942 to the last model in 1945, amounted to fewer than 400 machines. In that same time, the United States produced 49,234 Shermans. One side built 1,000, the other side built 50,000. It was arithmetic so brutal that no battlefield heroics could change it. For every Tiger that rumbled forward, there were 36 Shermans waiting somewhere across the Atlantic. For every German breakthrough, there were American reserves ready to fill the gap within days. And the imbalance didn't stop at tanks. Fuel. In the summer of 1944, retreating U.S. units once abandoned 50,000 gallons of gasoline in a single depot. German intelligence reported the find in disbelief, noting that this amount exceeded the fuel ration of an entire panzer division for 6 months. Ammunition. American artillery routinely fired more shells in a single day than the Wehrmacht could manufacture in a week. During the Battle of the Bulge, U.S. guns expended 1.2 million artillery rounds in just 3 weeks. Trucks. The U.S. built over 2.3 million military vehicles during the war. Germany, strangled by shortages, often relied on horses to pull supplies to the front as late as 1944. For German soldiers in the field, these numbers weren't abstractions. They were lived reality. One diary found on a captured panzer officer in August 1944 read simply, "We destroy 5 Shermans, 10 return. We destroy 10, 20 return. This is no longer war, it is slaughter by industry." That was the truth. Germany was not defeated by better tactics or even by superior soldiers. It was defeated by factories, assembly lines, and the logistics of a democracy that had turned its entire economy into a war machine. Every Tiger was precious. Every Sherman was expendable. That difference decided the war. By the time American forces crossed the Rhine in March 1945, the German panzer divisions had been reduced to scattered remnants, their Tigers broken down or abandoned. And still, the Shermans came, rolling forward in endless columns, the steel embodiment of a truth the Germans had realized too late. The mathematics of defeat had been written in Detroit, in Pittsburgh, in Chicago, and it was carried to Europe on the decks of Liberty ships. The Tiger may have been the king of the battlefield, but kings fall when outnumbered 50-1. Summer 1943, a train station in Mexia, Texas. Hundreds of German POWs, veterans of the Afrika Korps, stepped off Pullman cars expecting hardship and humiliation. Instead, they were met with electric lights blazing in every window, Coca-Cola bottles tossed casually into trash bins, and American civilians driving their own cars to the depot. To men raised on years of Nazi propaganda, the shock was indescribable. Obergefreiter Hans Müller wrote secretly in his diary, "In Germany, we fight in darkness. Even before the war, only 1 farm in 5 had electricity. Here, every farmhouse glows at night. They waste more light in 1 hour than Berlin uses in a day." Another POW recalled watching dock workers in Norfolk, Virginia. Each man wore leather boots, smoked American cigarettes, and ate meat sandwiches for lunch. These weren't generals or party officials. They were ordinary laborers, and they lived better than most German officers. The prisoners soon understood what their commanders had denied. America's strength was not just in tanks or planes. It was in the system, a democracy that harnessed the labor of millions, where women riveted B-24 bombers, teenagers built radios, and factories across 48 states worked in harmony like parts of a giant machine. One captured officer later admitted, "We thought America was soft, but what we saw was a country of infinite energy. Even their waste was magnificent." They were right. America's waste, half-eaten steaks tossed overboard by sailors, gasoline spilled from overflowing drums, cigarettes burned halfway, wasn't carelessness. It was proof of something Germany could never match. A nation so rich in resources, so vast in industry, that abundance itself became a weapon. The Tiger tank had been Germany's pride, a fortress on tracks. But in the end, it was no match for Liberty ships, assembly lines, and the simple American habit of fixing machines with a wrench and sending them back into battle. By 1945, when the ruins of Berlin smoldered and tigers lay abandoned in fields, the verdict was clear. The war had not been won by the sharpest sword, but by the largest forge. The legacy of that victory wasn't just military, it was personal. For German POWs who returned home, many carried back an unshakable memory of what they had seen. A land where even the smallest towns had lights, cars, and radios. A land where democracy had turned industry into a weapon greater than any tiger. And for the American veterans who drove those Shermans across Europe, the lesson was simple. Courage wins battles, but industry wins wars. The tiger may have been feared, but the Sherman, multiplied by tens of thousands, carried the weight of democracy on its steel tracks and rolled it straight into victory. If you believe this story deserves to be remembered, please like and subscribe. And now I'd like to hear from you. Do you think Germany ever truly had a chance against America's factories? Or was the outcome decided before the first tank even rolled into battle? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, give this video a like and make sure you subscribe. That way, you'll be here with us for the next untold chapter of World War II.